Just give us a thumbs up when we're going. Right. Okay, we are now broadcasting by streaming. So good morning. Welcome to this meeting of the Corporate Services and Economic Growth Overview and Scrutiny Committee. So first on the agenda, we are welcoming new members. This is the first meeting since the election, so welcome to all of you who are new members to this committee. The membership are set out at item 1 and also the terms of reference of the committee. I think we'll take that as read. So we'll move on to apologies for absence.
We have apologies from Councillor Taylor and Councillor Wearmouth.
Okay, thank you very much. And next is the minutes of the previous meeting, which was held on the 8th of March. Obviously, some of you weren't there, but some of you were. Are we happy to agree those minutes? Agreed? Yep. Sign them. No, I'll sign them later. Okay. Okay, number 4, disclosure of members' interests. Anything? Oh, Councillor Oliver.
Chair, I'll declare an interest in item 8 and I'll leave the room.
Item 8, which is... Okay, fine. Any other disclosures? No? Okay. Item 5, forward plan of cabinet decisions. This is pages 5 to 8. Sean, if you'd like to just note what this is.
Yeah, this is the forward plan of the cabinet decisions. Just to make it clear for new members, this is not for the committee, this is for the cabinet. But it gives you notice of the sorts of issues that are coming up, so that the committee may identify 1 or 2 issues that they want to put onto their own work programme. But this is just to give notice of those issues to be considered by forthcoming cabinet.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, next is the item 6, which is the Borderlands deal, which is page 9 in your bundle. And I think Janice is going to talk to this one. Oh, welcome, Councillor Sanderson. That's all right. Is Janice here?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, there you are. Oh, sorry.
I'm hiding along here.
Hiding down there.
Morning, everyone. Right. I don't know if Councillor Sanderson wants to say anything to begin with, or do you want me just to plough on?
Yes, if I may. Sorry, I'm a little late. Just tied up in another call. I just wanted to say that I think the Borderlands programme is an exceptionally good programme to be part of. The relationships with the other councils in which we work is extremely good, and Janice has done a fantastic job in keeping the momentum going on this, there are great things either in place or going to take place in Northumberland, and I think it's a wonderful, a genuinely wonderful programme to be part of. I think the next stage is potentially going to be needs to have some explanation, and that's why I think it's important that we have this morning from Janice. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sanderson. Janice, if you'd like to talk us through it.
Morning, everyone. Is that everybody hear me? Yep. It's Janice Rose, Head of Economy and Regeneration. I'm just going to quickly run through a few slides outlining the report, specifically relating to the PLACE programme, which is one of the elements, a key element of the Borderlands PLACE programme. So the deal was signed in March. Losing my dates already. In March, £350 million deal with UK and Scottish governments, 200 million to be spent in England. And 50 million of that 350 million is on something called the PLACE programme. And we fought long and hard to get this element of the deal because it wasn't easy. It's an area of the government tend to like us to focus on projects and deals, but the PLACE programme is something where we're actually breaking new ground and developing things that are relevant to all our towns, and particularly the towns that perhaps have not been funded before. And in that case, they tend to be the smaller towns that we've focused on. So that was one of the premises of this PLACE programme, is that, as I come through the slide, there are over 100 towns in the Borderlands area, and it's to make sure that we give some resource to those that have struggled to get funding in the past. You'll see from this slide, and it's in the documentation, that there is 30 million on the English side and for Cumbria and Northumberland, and 20 million on the Scottish side. That sounds quite a lot of money, but when you start to spread it out over a 10-year period, over 100 towns, as I say, it starts to get soaked up. So what we've done, and I'll come back to this in the presentation, is From our experience of dealing with smaller towns, we've used indicative allocation of up to 3 million per town. So that's indicative. It's not going to be hard and fast, but that kind of gives us a guide as to what tends to have a good impact on a town of the size we're talking about. So on that basis, of the 30 million in England, 18's for Cumbria and 12 is for Northumberland. So you all can do the maths that equates to 4 towns, essentially. But you'll see as we go through the report, we've actually changed that slightly. But that's kind of the ground rules of what we were working on. We've had to work very closely with government because of its groundbreaking nature. We have replicated elements of the town deal process, which some of you will be aware of, has been applied to Blythe, and we're hoping that will be applied to other towns. And that tends to focus on bigger towns in the county, such as Blythe. We're also hoping to pursue town deals for Ashington, Hexham, Berwick as we go forward. So, as I say, we've tried to focus this one on a similar blueprint. So in that sense, we're being asked to generate for each town a place plan, and that'll cover everything that we want to see happening in that town, working with local stakeholders. So it's a whole town plan. And that might come up with 15 to 20 projects across a spectrum of activity. And that will provide a blueprint that we can then look to, not just Borderlands money, but other funding to secure those projects going forward. What the Borderlands money will invest in is those that are specifically economic and specifically relating to capital, because that's what the Borderlands growth deal is all about. So out of that 15 to 20, we might have 4 to 6 that are economic and capital. And that's what the 3 million would be targeted at. And to unlock that money, we then have to do a town investment plan, which just drills into those projects in much more detail. So you've got your place plan and then your investment plan that'll sit below it. And that'll be on the, as I say, the economic capital plans. Other projects will go forward in other ways, but that's how we'll do it. And in government terms, that BTIP, you've affectionately known now as the BTIP, is the equivalent of a business case. So you'll be aware from previous work of Cabinet and this committee, the number of projects we have to do that have need a business case. So the BTIP is the equivalent of a BTIP, and it'll cover those 5 or 6 projects. We don't have to do a business case for each individual project. And as the slide says, we'll be using town teams. In some cases, those town teams already exist. We've put it in inverted commas, they'll have different names across, but it's to basically bring all the stakeholders together in a locally led process. And then an independent place programme that sits below the Borderlands Partnership Board that Glenn sits on will then just make sure that they conform with the place programme parameters. It's not to approve them, that's the Borderlands Partnership Board, and this council will approve our place plans and BTIPs, but it's to make sure they're consistent with the guidance and with the business case that's been done at a programme level. As I say, there's more than 100 towns across the Borderlands area, all kind of different towns, different sizes, different characteristics, some fairly large and some very small, and some set in big rural settings. So we've had to apply a unified index right across the Borderlands area to make sure that we're being consistent and adopting a transparent and evidence-based approach. And it's fair to say that the government have been very much on our shoulder making sure that we do that. And so when I go through how the towns have been selected, it's been very much, we've had to demonstrate that to government, and we've had to make sure it's consistent across the 5 local authorities that are in the Borderlands area. So it's based on a 2-stage gateway process, which sounds a bit of jargon, but basically we need to look at the statistics that we have available at a town level to try and understand which towns are doing better than others. So the ones that are doing the best, we won't be investing in. It's the ones where there's the biggest issues. And then with a range of qualitative factors that kind of look at some of the things that are happening in the town, because some of the statistics are quite old, they're not that many at the town level in actual fact. And so I'm just going to go through those now. So this is the statistical analysis of the towns. It's summarised very briefly in the appendix, but I've pulled out the table to show you that red is those towns that are demonstrating the highest market failure, and green are the ones that are perhaps doing better than other towns. It's all relative to all the towns in the Borderlands area, not the country, it's the Borderlands area. And the first parameter, the first gateway that we agreed at a Borderlands level, that any town that scores less than 150 is discarded at this point in time, because they are seen as they're actually doing okay at this point in time. So on this basis, for Northumberland, Clonteeland, Corbridge and Allendale dropped out of the system. I should have emphasised that of the 100 towns at borderlands level, there's 23 in scope for Northumberland. So 23 to 4 is what we're trying to get to. Okay? And the 23 come from the local plan. And that's the 23 that are listed here. So it's the larger towns, the smaller town centres, and then the district centres. So that's the first. The first sift was to discard those towns that are performing the best on the statistics. Okay, so Clonteeland, Corbridge and Allendale are discarded at that point. We then applied 6 filters, and I'm just going to go through each one of them in some detail, just so that everybody can understand where we've got to. We've discarded towns that have recently or are currently benefiting from some kind of regeneration mechanism or funding in the recent past. And those are listed there. They're Amble, got coastal community funds. Berwick's had quite a lot of money, and it's also getting other money through Borderlands. Blythe, I've mentioned, had a town deal. Hexham's got a heritage action zone as we speak. Morpeth had quite a lot of public sector county council investment over the last 18 months, 2 years. And Wooler's also getting other funding from Borderlands. So they've all been discarded at this stage because they've seen, as I said earlier, our emphasis here is on towns that have perhaps not benefited from that kind of funding. We've then discarded, filter 2 is we've discarded the larger towns with a population in excess of 25,000 residents. That's largely because we think we can get them funded from other places, such as the Levelling Up funds. Exactly, Towndale for Blythe is a good example of that. And equally, £3 million, to be fair, would not really scratch the surface. That would probably equate to one project in those size towns. So at that point, Ashington and Cramlington are discarded from the state. They're the only other ones that are left from the ones that I've already mentioned that have a population of over 25,000. Filter 3 is that we discard those towns where they do have a regeneration need, but it will not be met by the eligible activity within the borderlands. And this is largely the difference between a capital and a revenue project. So all the projects that we're aware of in Guidepost, Stakeford and Choppington, which is the one that's discarded at this stage, largely relate to people and business interventions, and that's revenue. We don't have any pipeline of capital projects where you're physically building things. A lot of that infrastructure is already there, so that's why that one's discarded at this stage. Just to continue, we then, so having discarded certain towns, we then looked at the ones that we perhaps needed to prioritise for particular reasons. So we've prioritised those that we think would benefit from the preparation of a place plan because something's happened in that town or they're not making the most of some of the assets that they already have. So on this basis, Anik was promoted on the basis that whilst it has a lot of individual assets, including the garden and the castle and one or two other things, the town centre is actually performing pretty poorly relative to other comparators. So we feel that a place plan will actually help bring the town closer together and actually harness those assets much better. And equally, it's got out of town retail. So it's how do we offset that with things in the town centre? Bedlington and Bedlington Station, again, significant changes in the town centre with the Tesco's pulling out of the town at the point of delivery. Some work being done there, but still feel that there's more work that we need to do, and that investment, that initial investment that's happening now in Bedlington, isn't enough to transform that place. And equally, the opportunities of the Northumberland line coming into Bedlington Station over the next 2 years, how can we unlock the potential of that? And equally, the fact that we've got a town that's called Bedlington Station, it feels that there's a case for a place plan to bring the two parts of the town more tangibly together so that we can look at the combined assets of those two places, whilst retaining their separate identity. And Newbiggin is the other one that we felt needed to be prioritised on the basis that Coastal Communities Fund's been a real boon for towns that happen to be on the coast, and this in many respects is replicating a similar process to that. But for whatever reason, Newbiggin have never actually harnessed considerable resources from that pot. So again, we feel, and we know there's been a lot of work done in Newbiggin over the last year to put an economic strategy, so that actually can be quite readily translated into a place plan and really hopefully pull that town together and start to move it forward. Newbiggin is one of the worst performing towns in terms of the data. So those 3 towns were prioritised. Secondly, the next set of prioritisations was another part of the Borderlands is to really look at those smaller centres that cover a significant hinterland, and as such they have in a Borderlands context quite a big role to play, that if they start to fail, the wider hinterland starts to fail as well. And so 4 towns have been prioritised on that basis, and these really link to other Borderlands projects as well, particularly the Hadrian's Wall corridor. So we're doing a similar programme for Hadrian's Wall, and we felt that these towns needed to benefit in tandem with that work, given that rationale about their rural hinterlands. So Bellingham, Haltwhistle, Prudhoe and Rothbury were prioritised on that basis. Okay. So then we looked at, just as I said, that left us with about half a dozen towns that we hadn't looked at, obviously, hadn't been discarded or prioritised. So we, as the last filter at this point, we looked at those and felt that none of those warranted prioritisation above the ones that we'd just done, for the various reasons we've said. Either wasn't enough evidence of economic need or of capital investment requirements at this point in time. So at this point, we discarded Belford, Hayden Bridge, Sea Houses and Seaton, Delaval and Holywell. I should say before we move on that just because we're going through this process for Borderlands doesn't mean to say that all 23 towns don't matter to Northumberland. We will just find other ways to bring forward the investment. What we're looking at here is how we can best manage the Borderlands money. So that left us, so as I've already explained, we have an investment threshold of 3 million. We've got down to 7 towns. And we could have kept applying more filters, but I think across the Borderlands, the 5 councils then sat back and thought, well, we probably want to do place plans for those towns that we've, and every council area has gone through a similar process. And that's on the basis that there might be funding that we can draw in from other places. We can use our own capital programme. This is a 10-year programme. There might be elements where we can bring in £1 or £2 million every second or third year to help complement the 12 million from Borderlands. As I've already mentioned, there are other Borderlands programmes such as Hadrian's Wall, and there's an energy master planning process going on as well. So, and it may be the case, because the towns vary quite markedly in size. Bedlington, I think, is the biggest. It's about 13,000. And Bellingham's the smallest at 1,200. So it might be that not all of them need 3 million and that we can move the money around a bit. So it's an indicative allocation. It's all going to be predicated on the projects that come forward. So on that basis, I think as officers, we felt that the 7 stood up and that we should do the place planning process for 7 and see where that left us. And then we can then inform subsequent external funding and council capital programme bids in the future. So the 7 are, just to recap, and we're doing them in 2 waves to try and maximise our capacity, but also to tie in with other Borderlands investment. These will mean they're only 3 or 4 months apart. We're just staggering them just to help get them started in different ways. So wave 1 will be Anik, Bedlington and Bedlington Station and Newbiggin, and wave 2 will be Bellingham, Haltwhistle, Prudhoe and Rothbury, and that largely is to tie in with the Hadrian's Wall work that's happening at the same time. I think I've said Appendix 4 there, but I think it might be Appendix 3. I can't remember. Anyway, it's one of the appendices does emphasise the rollout and how we're going to do it over the next 12 to 15 months. It's fair to say that some of the towns might go faster than others as well. Some towns that I've already mentioned, Newbiggin, have got an economic strategy. Some towns will have projects that are really ready to go and can move forward. Others might need a bit more time. So the waves are kind of a starting point. It might be that we actually find that they go at different paces altogether, but it was to try and make sure that we're following a similar process in each of the towns. So I've just unpacked here the main process by which we're going to go through the place plan preparation to make it consistent across the piece. So it will include briefings of all of the ward county councillors in the first instance. We'll then bring in the town and parish councillors for that town, and we'll start to identify the wider stakeholders. We'll then have a facilitated stakeholder mapping session, and the board for each town will be established, a town team, whatever we call it, something that brings all of the parties together. And then we'll start to have a facilitated session about the projects that those stakeholders feel should come forward. We'll then have a consultation on the vision, the objectives and the long list, and we'll review those responses before then starting to get the meeting of writing all of that down and getting that into a place plan. And then we'll we'll develop the place plan document, and then that'll come back to the council for approval. And at that point, we'll start to tease out which of those projects are the economic and capital ones that we really want to take forward through a borderlands lens, and which are the other ones that we go through other lenses and other funding streams. This is a process that we've done in other places. We've worked together with Development Trust, parish councils, community forums all across the piece. So we know it works. It's just about pushing through the process, and as I say, it'll go at the pace of that town. And they don't need to follow a blueprint. I think that's the other thing we wanted to emphasise. It's not a standard document because we want them to feel and look as the way the community would want. They just have to contain the component parts, but they can feel different and look different in that sense, because they need to resonate with the community themselves. Okay, that's me.
Thank you very much, Janice. That was a great overview. It's quite a detailed process you've gone through. There's more detail in the reports. Any members got anything they'd like to ask? Oh, Councillor Dunn.
Yes, thanks, Councillor Bourne. I just wanted to thank Janice and Tony, whose name is actually on the report, but he's not here, I don't think, today, for this report. And I think it clearly sets out the background to the Borderlands deal. And I find that very helpful for those of us who are new members on this committee, as you referenced earlier. My question when I read through it, Janice, was going to be, the understanding that there was 12 million secured through the adoption of the PLACE programme, and a further 21 million would be from further public funding, etc. And my question was going to be how confident the team was that that funding would be achievable, but I think Janice has sort of put that forward very well in our presentation. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Councillor Dunn, I mean, I think we found it's quite hard to do a planning process such as this, if I call it a place planning process, whatever we call it, without the carrot of some money. It's really challenging to keep the community engaged in that process when you've not got something to aim at. I mean, for example, if you use Blythe, where it's had a town deal, it's been really easy to energise the community because they can see a prize at the end of it. And I think that's one of the things we try to sell to government. That if you give us a prize of 2 to 3 million, working with communities at this scale, we think we can then really catalyse other investment to come from it. And that's demonstrated if you look at places like Amble and Wooler, where they've maybe done this, we're using them as exemplars. They've got the first foot on the rung and they've got something such as 2 or 3 million. And then it's just kept growing. And the community have got the confidence and the wherewithal to bid for projects themselves, and the council can take a step back and just support. So we're confident, I think, Councillor Dunn, that will be that's the end game, that they actually are self-sufficient towns that can then stand on their own feet and take projects forward.
Thank you very much. Councillor Jackson.
All right, thank you. It's really exciting to actually see this come along. I'll just make 2 or 3 comments. The first one is it's completely new money for Northumberland, and it's new money that's taken an awful lot of negotiation over a period of 3 or 4 years by the council officers and the team at Borderlands, and I think they deserve a huge congratulations for that, because I know from being a little bit involved that it hasn't been easy, and that actually central government were a little bit sceptical at the start, but we persuaded them of the power of our arguments for investing in Northumberland, and it's investing in the left behind towns, and in terms of Northumberland, this is our way of levelling up towns that have been left behind and ignored for sort of decades in some cases, that seem to be falling behind the rest of the county, the rest of the area, and the rest of the country indeed. It's their chance to get a secure economic future, and that's the last point I would make. It's not about creating fancy places and it's about actually creating real economic growth, real jobs, and real prospects for those towns. And I think it's a real opportunity for our county, and we should grab it with both hands.
Thank you, Councillor Jackson. Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for that, Janice. I had a couple of questions for you. I'll just ask you both. Who decides what the projects are? How does that work? And obviously, I'm looking at the Bedlington one. It says it starts now in July. What does that actually mean in terms of what's going to happen now?
Okay. The first one is the community of that town will flush out the projects. It's fair to say that the economic ones that are in the borderlands will need to go through another shift to a place programme board, but the officers will be supporting that community to make sure we tease out. And in the case of most of the towns, they will have economic projects. You know, it's the things that you'd expect us to be doing, and I think that's one of the reasons why we've picked the towns that we have, because we know there's an economic need. So there was a process, but we would hope that working with the community, we make sure that we get those right projects going forward to the next phase. So it's the community, but they have to be endorsed by the Borderlands Partnership to make sure that they're consistent. Okay?
So are we just talking about economic projects?
So, no, in terms of the place plan, it would be all projects in that town, Malcolm. What we then, so as I said, there was 50, maybe, there might be, say in Bedlington, there might be 20 projects that come forward that we all think, yeah, these are the ones that we want to go for over the next 10 years. They're enshrined in this place plan. What we're then saying is that all 20 of them will be working with the community to make sure they land them. But those that are economic and have particular benefits through a Borderlands lens, and there might be only 4 or 5 of those, that's the ones that will then go forward to get the 3 million. But we'll be working on all 20 to try and land them through other mechanisms. So and I think that's the point that Councillor Dunn was making, is that once you get money coming into a town, it actually means that more money flows in. Things start to change, there's a dynamic happens, the community start to get more confidence about bidding for things, the private sector start to get more involved. So that's what we're hoping with these towns, that once we start to get that momentum, other funding starts to flow into them. And it's fair to say that in Bedlington, we fully expect that we'll need to get more than 3 million to cover, you know, that's the biggest town that we've identified. And so 3 million probably will only be part of the solution. We've got to work hard to find other sources. In terms of starting now, I think the first phase is to start those briefings with ward councillors and parish and county council, so that in the autumn we're ready to start rolling it out to a wider stakeholders. So as Councillor Dunn rightly says, it's Tony Kirshop who will be the lead officer. He'll start now once it's gone through Cabinet tomorrow, hopefully, touch wood, that we'll start to get those sessions in place over the summer, so that in the autumn we can then start to have those stakeholder sessions to start getting people around the table to talk it through. Because as Councillor Jackson says, feels like we've been talking and working through the process with the government for a long time now, and we're kind of keen to get back into the content and working with the communities to move them forward. And that's why we've done them in 2 waves. So Bedlington, Anik and Newbiggin will be the first 3 that we'll do now, if you see what I mean. And then probably October, November time we'll start the next wave, and the 2 will run in tandem.
Thank you. Councillor Bainham.
Thanks, Chair. Great work, Janice. Excellent report. A couple of things. On Anik, yes, they have the castle, the gardens, but the town centre is suffering because of the out-of-town shopping, and also the gardens and the castle aren't in the centre. They draw people away from the centre, so that's great news for Anik. It is suffering, the high street. The other one, Newbiggin, really following on a bit from Councillor Dunn's comments, done a few projects over the years there, and whilst it's a very close-knit community, they seem, I don't know whether it's reluctant or cautious of getting involved with sort of projects like this. Do you think you can coax them into that?
I mean, in both towns, you've hit on the issues. Obviously, the garden, the castle, just by quirk of where the car parks are, by nothing else, turns its back effectively on the town centre, you could argue. So part of that rationale will be to open up. And to be fair, the castle and the garden fully appreciate that they want people to visit the town. And obviously that's been compounded by COVID and retail being hit. So really we want to put some more cultural activities back into that town centre. So yeah, you're right. And I think there's a willingness in the town to kind of, and the castle and the garden to really work together. Newbiggin, yeah, there's been a lot of different attempts, and I think the economic strategy that we've now got is a good platform. All communities have different opinions and different characteristics, and they're not unique. I guess it's just played out a little bit more in that town. That's why we want to really try and put some effort behind that one, because there's a lot of good projects, a lot of good potential in Newbiggin. It's underselling itself. If you compare some of the places further south on the coast, Townmouth, Whitley Bay, etc., it should be much more akin to them. So we are confident that we've now got a platform that we can work from. But yeah, I think some of the towns will be easier than others, if I put it like that.
Councillor Donegan.
Thanks, Councillor Bourne. The report goes into great detail about the work involved and the help that local partnerships might need or require to develop these place plans, and Janice has just sort of referred to that. And all of this is going to be undertaken by the existing resources within the Economy and Regeneration Service. So it's just a quick question, Janice. How many people are actually in that team, and how have we ensured that the team isn't overstretched? Because it just seems like an awful lot of work here. And a second one, before I finish, the 7 towns prioritised there, will the plans sort of ensure that the benefits ripple out to outlying villages?
Yeah, so I'll answer the second bit first, just before I forget it. But yes, so if I use Rothbury as an example there, I would envisage that Rothbury would encompass Cragside, Simonside, the village Thropton, it'll include their hinterlands where that's appropriate and where people think that that's part of the town. So yes, and that'll be part of the initial discussion to what's the scope of the place plan. In terms of resources, we actually saw this, because it's been so long in the gestation, we've seen this coming a little bit. So we have strengthened that bit of the service over the last 2 or 3 years. I'm not going to say that it would be great to have some more, but that's but equally, the team that delivers on this is about 5 or 6 strong. But we're confident that's sufficient. We can bring in consultants in we have in other parts of the Borderlands programme to help, particularly with the business case elements and just making sure we've got that economic case. But this is a tried and tested route that we've previously done, and you're very familiar with Tony, for example, and his team. So we're confident, and I'm sure that if we start to have issues, we would bring something back through Cabinet as to what those challenges might be. But at this point in time, we think it's doable.
Councillor Oliver.
Thank you. I think excellent report, and great to see all of this new money coming into Northumberland. There's a common theme across many of these towns and some of the other towns that are being addressed in other ways, that they've become sort of hollowed out, the town centres and out-of-town retail, changing nature of retail and different ways of shopping and so on. What sort of practical projects do you envisage actually happening to draw people back into the town centres and boost those local economies?
Yeah, I mean, I think we see a lot of cultural and probably housing as well coming back into the town centres to increase the footfall. And walking and cycling, I think we'll see a lot of walking and cycling initiatives as well, again, to make the town centres a more attractive place for people to stay longer in. I think that's part of the issue, and to walk around rather than perhaps driving to one destination to do part of your shopping and then leaving again. So I think it's not going to be easy, but we've got experience from other places of where you can do a number of smaller initiatives like that, and it just changes the dynamic, Councillor Oliver. So yeah, I think the other thing that we're keen, I think the town centres in a smaller town are perhaps slightly different from cities, and the independent trader, I think, has still got a role to play, and it's again just how we can help that piece of retail and continue. So it's trying to make sure we've got this, and I think some of the work that we're doing in Bedlington, for example, is to provide smaller retail units that are actually more ripe for that, rather than perhaps the bigger stores or the bigger, the niche stores or the footprints that the chain stores require. They just have a blueprint that they want to apply. So I think we've got to look more sensibly at and I guess the other thing is pubs and restaurants, and that evening economy. That's another area that perhaps our town centres, in some places the shutters come down at 6 o'clock and the place becomes quite a barren place to visit. So if we can change that dynamic as well, and even things like microbreweries and sort of smaller places as well. So I think it's about scale, niche, and trying to equip the retail, you know, the entrepreneurs out there with the needs that they have.
Thank you. Councillor Wallace.
Thanks, Chair. Very interesting report, Janice, from my very first meeting. I've followed Borderlands for a few years, as you well know, and that really is... it's a pleasure to see Bedlington Station on an agenda, I've got to be honest with you. But Bedlington, I well recall in my days at Wansbeck, when you mentioned £3 million on average for a town, we spent £2 million just on front shops. So £3 million can soon be easily digested. 20 projects, perhaps. I think Malcolm will tell me there's probably been about 200 put forward for Bedlington, so good luck with that one. At the moment, I think they'll take anything. And that, I think, is the dilemma we have here. Over the years in the Wansbeck area, it's not a nice thing to say, but the consultants have proven to us as former district councillors that they've tended to be led by industry such as the coal, by unions, by the co-op, by the health authority, by councillors. And that's perhaps why Newbiggin hasn't advanced as it should have. Parts like the Hurst and Ashington hasn't developed. But focusing back on Bedlington Station, the majority of people live in Bedlington Station, but it also includes Sleekburn. Now, Sleekburn's not included here, but the wealth of Northumberland will be built on Sleekburn over the next generation. The railway line is important to access that employment in Sleekburn. When Councillor Dunn quite rightly identifies, will it trickle out? It will trickle out. It'll be a very slow trickle because there's not even a bus after 1:30 in the afternoon from Sleekburn to access Bedlington Station. When you look for projects coming from Sleekburn, it'll never happen. It won't happen. It'll take the council to do it, and it'll take the council to consult with the community. Whereas in Bedlington, you may get a deluge of suggestions. In Sleekburn, you'll have to put the suggestions to those people. And this sounds horrible to say, you know, when we're supposed to be a democratic society, but it's the reality. It's reality. This is transformational, and we're going to use that word, I think, a lot in this administration with all these developments that's happening, because there's more to come in Sleekburn. And Bedlington Station, which was only formed in 1901, it's not that long ago, it's going to grow. But Janice, it's a long way from Bedlington. It's a long way from Bedlington. The bus from Camas that goes to Bedlington Station stops at Bedlington Station. It doesn't even go to Bedlington. The bus, it's integrated system. It takes you to Blythe or it takes you to Ashington. It doesn't take you to Bedlington. And yet, uniquely, we see these numbers together. We see these names together. I live in NE22. Bedlington's NE22. But I can use the health authority in Camas. It's a strange to get my head around, but I welcome the fact you'll be talking to the parishes, being a parish councillor for the past 12 years. I think that's terrific. And other stakeholders, and the big stakeholders will be your British Vaults, will be your NSLs, who are doing tremendous work in the community at the minute. So sorry to go on at length, Chairman, but I think we need a challenge, and the challenge will be the community. The aspirations and the delivery. Yeah. Thank you.
I mean, just to come back on that, I mean, I think we found similar issues in Blythe when we started the town deal process, Councillor Wallace. I think everybody was kind of, oh, nothing ever happens here. You know, it was kind of a very cynical, if I use that word, community. But because we had the carrot of there is something actually on the table here, rather than it just being, let's do a plan and see what we can get, it actually did help. It took us, don't get me wrong, it did take time. And I do think the Bedlington example is slightly different from the other 6 in that I agree with you. I think the 3 million is only the start, but it's at least a way of getting the communities round the table. There's something to start with. And it's about looking at the whole of the asset, as you say. I think we've too long looked at the various component parts in isolation. And I think by bringing everybody together, we can at least start to put that together and start to unlock. Because I think you're absolutely right. There's a whole load of other things that we can unpack in Bedlington as we go forward. The 3 million is only the start, to be honest. So, yeah, I echo everything you've said.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, thank you, councillors. We had some good questions there and some good comments. And thank you much for the report. So, the recommendations that are going to the Cabinet on the front of the report, I take it as a committee we're happy to endorse those. Yep, agreed. Okay. So moving on to agenda item 7, which is on page 27 of your papers. This is the annual update report for workforce. This would have been introduced by Councillor Wearmouth, but he's not here, so I'll just hand this over to Kelly Angus, who's going to talk us through. Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you very much, Chair. In terms of this report, this is an annual position statement in relation to the strategic workforce issues and action plans, and it covers the year of 2020 to 2021. First and foremost, I would say 2020 to 2021 financial year has been very, very different from a workforce point of view. Coronavirus has been upon us. We've had many workforce issues, and those issues have mattered very differently and affected staff in many different ways. So it's certainly been particularly challenging. I think first and foremost, I would like to pay tribute to our staff for their resilience and contribution to the Council's ongoing emergency response. We have put in place a number of different measures which are covered within the report, but we have also included a structured and enhanced health and wellbeing suite of activities throughout the last 12 months. And we've also, that's not only staff who've been in the workplace, because we do have many frontline staff who've continued to provide services throughout the pandemic, but also those staff who've had to adapt the way that they work and to also work remotely. We've been conducting regular briefings and information sessions for staff, both on a scheduled and a drop-in basis. And we have provided additional personal protective equipment, PPE, to staff and obtained feedback from them around the adequacy and localised supplies. We've conducted personalised risk assessments for every member of staff and ensured that managers have had individual conversations with staff, and those have been focused on staff health and wellbeing, personal circumstances as well as work-related matters. We've also needed to redeploy staff throughout the county, often at short notice, and we've arranged for our staff to have early vaccinations through our occupational health service for COVID-19. We recognise that in autumn 2020, this was going to be a long haul rather than a short haul, and we revised our interim HR and OD people strategy to cover a 6-month period up until the end of April. And this is included in the report and is in recognition of the need for a more rationalised focus during this period and to very much focus on our staff's health and well-being. We are in the process of producing a revised wider people strategy which will cover the period of 2021 to 24, which will run alongside the revised corporate plan when that's produced. And that will provide more narrative as to our ambition to continue to be an employer of choice in a post-pandemic era. I think just some of the key issues I'd like to bring to the committee's attention. In terms of headline data, we've had a slight increase in turnover, but this is still very much below the national average. Workforce Committee has continued to meet throughout the last 12 months, focused on our continued good performance around our key performance indicators and delivering the workforce strategy, but very much in the moment be problem solving as a group. We've provided updates to members on key work streams of activity. And most of those are within the report, and you'll notice within the report we've also indicated whether those are complete and whether or not those pieces of work are ongoing, as some of them are continued to. From a HR and OD team point of view, I have to say, despite the circumstances of the year, the team has shown fantastic resilience and has been shortlisted or won a number of accolades and awards, which we are extremely proud of. and our key performance indicators are excellent in most directorates, and I would like to thank our managers for their leadership and staff for their engagement, which has been outstanding during the last 12 months. We've achieved more or less overall excellent statutory and mandatory training numbers. We've completed over 550 apprenticeships, which is well in excess of our PSD duty target. We've continued to recruit graduate trainees and support our staff with their training, and we have also completed virtual work experience opportunities for young people in Northumberland to continue to engage them in local government careers. We've seen a number of reductions across the board in relation to our case management interventions, and these are very much around disciplinary and grievances. We've continued to deliver coaching to our staff. We have worked very closely with occupational health, and our health and wellbeing coordinator has had extreme energy, I would describe it, as covering our workforce, developing initiatives in relation to those staff who are shielding, buddy schemes, and a wide range of health and wellbeing activities. And we have also achieved the Better Health at Work Ambassador status, which is an excellent award for the authority. We've had overall a 2% reduction in sickness absence that amounts to over £1 million in sickness absence cost reduction, and we have over 52.5% of staff in the last 12 months who've had no sickness absence at all, which is a significant achievement. We are continuing to use wellness action plans and stress risk assessments, but we recognise that the pandemic is going to introduce some very challenging health and wellbeing issues for us around mental health, and also very much in particular, which is very topical, long COVID, which we are already starting to see some significant issues across the workforce with. There are some information in the report around costs and rates by directorate, which is for information, and also some benchmarking data. One of the things we have been highly praised for is being our approach to undertake a personalised risk assessment for every single member of staff throughout the pandemic, and we have repeated that exercise, and that was highlighted most recently by the HMI inspectors in fire and rescue. We've introduced a COVID-19 helpline, which in the last week has been very, very busy, which is the first port of call for staff around any COVID-19 issues. We've also now got our staff bank well established, so we are recruiting local people for seasonal and temporary work, and that assists in reducing our agency expenditure. We've been nationally recognised for some of our equality, diversity and inclusion work, which is of great importance to us. And I think we have regularly sought the views of staff, and there's some information within the report around some staff survey data, which we have found very helpful. In terms of the issues that we have covered within this report, it's hard to put in writing the amount of effort which has gone into supporting our workforce across the last 12 months. But what I would say is there has been a significant focus and a huge amount of work which has been progressed despite the pandemic, but also very much so the notable achievements of staff, I would say, has shown a huge testament to the excellent workforce that we have across the county. And again, I'd like to reiterate that, but I'm happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you very much, Kelly, for that comprehensive report. Members, do we have any questions you'd like to raise? Councillor Robertson.
Thank you, Chair. Just one really. I'm just wondering how unique this report's going to go down. How much of this report was influenced by the pandemic? I mean, how much do you expect not to have these conditions in place in years to come, you know?
Thank you, Councillor Robinson. I think one of the things we have experienced as part of the pandemic is it has brought us some opportunities as well. So we have utilised technology across the county to enable our staff to work differently. So I think some of this report is absolutely influenced by the pandemic, but I think certainly some of the way that we manage our people going forward is likely to need a different set of skills. Our managers need to be able to manage our staff on the basis of outcomes, rather than kind of the traditional 9 till 5 or shift basis. So I think we've got a long road to go yet in relation to the pandemic and the subsequent implications for our workforce.
Councillor Murphy.
Thank you, Chair. I have 3 questions and a comment. So my comment, I'll start with. But first of all, I just wanted to say thank you very much for this incredibly detailed report. I think it's got a vast amount of statistics which are really helpful and which I personally will be wading through for a long time. My comment is about the staff bank, which I think is an absolutely brilliant idea. As somebody who was an agency worker for a long time for flexibility purposes, it always infuriated me that local authorities wasted so much money on basically dating agencies, which is all a recruitment organisation is. They introduce the worker to the end client, and I've long advocated for in-house flexibility. So I think that's a fantastic initiative, which I hope will save the local authority significant amounts of money going forward. My questions relate to exit interviews initially. So I'm interested in what circumstances they are used and why they aren't used universally. I worked in children's services and I know lots of people who've left Northumberland Children's Services, not for any sinister reason. They've just moved on to other jobs. And very few of them have ever been approached with the formal exit interview to ask about what could we have done to retain you? And given that children's services nationally is in such crisis with recruitment, I really think that would be a helpful policy to have as a universal thing, so that as a local authority we can retain our experienced staff. The second question is relating to how much the trade union side has input into these statistics and this data. Again, I feel there's a really important resource there because individual workers and teams regularly meet with trade union side, often informally, to talk about staff issues and staffing matters. And I'm just curious as to what formal mechanism there is for gathering that data and that information. And lastly, the issue of SafeCall and why it's being removed as a resource from councillors. No, I'm not saying that's the wrong thing. It might well be that there's a better system for that. But I'm curious as to whether it's relating to insurance reasons. What is the reason why it is employee only to use that as the kind of the whistleblowing, raising concerns issue? Given there are so few councillors compared to the thousands of staff, I would have thought that it wouldn't overburden any local authority outsourced service to have councillors use that. So I'd just be curious for a response to that. Thank you. Sorry, that was a lot.
That's great. Kelly, have you got answer those 3 questions? Thanks.
Yes, I have. Thank you, Councillor Murphy. So, and I would reiterate the point in relation to the bank opportunities. I think the bank is growing successfully and it's doing very well. And I'm certainly hoping that we will use that as well as a mechanism to recruit permanent staff from, as providing a career path. So fingers crossed with that, it is going very well. In terms of exit interviews, we do routinely offer exit interviews, so I'd like to go away and have a look at that and provide some information in relation to that, because I know personally I often get the results of those exit interviews and follow those up. So I would like to get some data on that, but I'll make sure in future reports that we do include that as well, because it is very useful. And I do agree that an exit interview does often give an employee an opportunity to give us some quite certainly very useful feedback, but in an unbiased and independent way, which is particularly helpful. In terms of the trade union side, we have an excellent relationship with our trade union colleagues. We work with them on a regular basis. They very much respond to and are involved in a number of key issues. They are members of our workforce committee, so trade union colleagues sit on our workforce committee. We also have a monthly informal trade union colleague meeting where we can talk to our trade union colleagues. There is also a planned meeting with Cabinet in the next couple of weeks. We also have our trade union colleagues who sit on what is called our policy subgroup. So our trade union colleagues help us form our employee policies in terms of how we manage our staff. And we also have a formal mechanism, which is the Joint Consultative Committee, and that first meeting was last week for this year. So I would say there are many, many mechanisms for our trade union colleagues to contribute, and we absolutely do value their contributions and expertise that they bring to us. In relation to SafeCall, if I can just cover this off in relation to whistleblowing generally. So our whistleblowing policy is for employees, and very clearly in line with the legislation, it is for employees who are workers. In terms of councillors, the ability and the public to raise issues through Safe Call is absolutely still there. But all issues which are raised by elected members and members of the public will, in the first instance, must be should I say, overseen by the monitoring officer. Councillors and members of the public, they're not employees. It is very different in line with the relevant legislation. So from our perspective, we will provide Safe Call. And Safe Call is a subscription service, so it costs us as an organisation to pay for every single employee to have the ability to raise concerns in that way. We don't pay a subscription for councillors or members of the public, although Safe Call will take anonymous or named concerns, but they will go through the monitoring officer in the first instance.
Thank you very much. Councillor Jackson.
Yeah, thank you. The first is a general comment about the whole report, and actually a sort of a big vote of thanks to all the employees of this organisation over the last year. It has been very trying times indeed, and the workforce has had to be extremely flexible, and I think that all 67 councillors have seen some fantastic sort of demonstrations of that commitment by all of the workforce. So that's the main comment. The sort of the question really is around what's just been talked about, this whistleblowing policy, and I'm not quite sure why that's been tacked onto this report. It's more about the legal framework and I think it would need a completely separate report and a much more detailed report to cover that off with some sort of detail. So when I can comment on Safe Call in particular. When it was set up, it was very much meant to be an open forum for the general public and for councillors and for all employees, and I would very much expect that to continue. In terms of whistleblowing policy, I'm not so sure that there is such a big difference between councillors and employees. I think as councillors we feel that we're employees of the council too, and I'd have to have a look at some legal opinion to demonstrate that there was a significant difference there. I think as councillors we do have a worry that routes to make formal complaints or whistleblowing complaints, depends how you define them, are actually quite narrow and limited in this council. Experience over the last year has shown that formal complaints to the monitoring officer don't really seem to get anywhere. Quite often we haven't even had acknowledgements or formal replies. When the replies do come, they're general, and there doesn't seem to be any detailed work and view from the monitoring officer sort of given to those formal complaints. I think I'm aware of a long list of complaints that haven't been dealt with satisfactorily, and some of that probably is due to the fact that unfortunately we don't really have a full-time and independent monitoring officer in place. The properly appointed monitoring officer has apparently been off sick for some considerable number of months, and I think we've had some sort of interims, but there doesn't seem to be anyone there at the moment with that specific independent view of what's put before him or her. I think there's a statement here that it says the whistleblowing policy has not been used correctly during the last year. Well, I need to see examples of that, and as I say, I think we need a proper system that all councillors understand and that all staff and all officers understand, and to see it applied independently and without any bias. So I'd propose that a much more detailed report on that is come forward. Just to have one generalised paragraph like this, it just isn't enough, I'm afraid.
Thank you, Councillor Jackson. You did sort of raise issues that were obviously beyond the normal scope of this report.
Could I come back on
Yeah,
that,
Kelly,
though,
would you
please,
like to? Yeah.
Chair? Thank you very much for that. So that's quite an extensive list I've got there, so I'll address them as I go. So, as I outlined earlier, the whistleblowing policy is a council employee policy, and Safe Call is a subscription service, and we do not pay a subscription for every single resident. So we currently pay a subscription for our staff. If we were to pay a subscription for residents, it would be somewhere in the region of a £330,000 bill, I would suggest. So I think the fact that we do have those mechanisms where Safe Call will take those concerns, I think it's adequate, certainly in relation to our organisation. In terms of the difference between a councillor and an employee, there is a very clear definition, and I can assure you that I have sought quite a lot of clarity in this regard. So, you know, certainly if Councillor Jackson would like to seek a further legal opinion, but I'm very comfortable that the definition of employee is workers. They receive a salary, they are paid, and they are under the direction of the authority. In terms of councillors, councillors receive an allowance and they cannot be directed by the authority or certainly by the head of paid service and the executive leadership team, which is different. In terms of monitoring officer arrangements, we do have monitoring officer, deputy monitoring officers in place. I cannot comment about the ongoing absence from the substantive monitoring officer, but we do have 3 deputy monitoring officers who are in place and who will, you know, certainly address any necessary issues. I think just to reiterate that this is a workforce report and it is about employees, and I can arrange for the whistleblowing policy to be recirculated to all of the committee. It is currently being reviewed to make sure that it is extremely explicit that in relation to the members of the public and elected members that they need to refer those matters of complaint to the monitoring officer. But in relation to staff, that policy, as approved through delegated approval by the head of paid service, is an employee policy and is around the 4,300 plus workers that we have across the organisation. And it's a contractual policy.
Can I just come back on that one, just a slightly technical point? In terms of whistleblowing, what happens if it works the other way around, if officers bring up whistleblowing complaints against councillors?
So in terms of thank you, Councillor Jackson. If a member of staff wishes to make a complaint regarding an elected member, they will either in the first instance be dealt with by their line manager and hopefully resolved informally, as all issues we would hope to be. But if not formally, it would have to be as a code of conduct complaint.
Okay, thank you for that clarity. And thank you, I think you said that you're happy to circulate the whistleblowing policy?
Yes, I'll share it with Sean now.
Thank you. Councillor Wallace was next.
Thank you, Chair. I have to be honest, I have a lot of sympathy and agreement with what Councillor Jackson's just said. And I'll tell you why, for 2 reasons. One, I've been involved with the Code of Conduct through NALC, and councillors up and down the county say the same thing. It's great that the public have protection, but where's the protection for councillors? It's not there in the Code of Conduct. Oh, I know where it is. Having been on the Standards Committee for the past 3 years, it goes to the monitoring officer. I think it's currently around about 20-25 complaints at the moment that's been lying there for best part of 12 months have not been resolved. So it's not happening, Chair. It's not happening. It's not being resolved. It's not the satisfaction of councillors. So I want to know, as a new councillor, if I feel something's wrong, where do I go? And I suddenly see here where there was something available until this report's come out, I'm not going to have. So I would like to see more on the details, and perhaps we should have the opportunity to say, can we extend this to include 67 more people? That's all I would like to see. The opportunity that if I think something's wrong, I can have it looked at, because I doubt the capacity at present of the monitoring officer team to being on the standards board and knowing how many remain unresolved. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Wallace. I've got Councillor Dunn.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I'd like to thank Kelly for the very comprehensive report, and I think all 67 councillors will recognise what strong leadership the team has given during the pandemic, and to ensure the health and well-being of the workforce, and in turn that everybody worked together in a really flexible way to look after residents across the whole county and to maintain and adapt our services. So that was the first thing. Secondly, with regards to the whistleblowing, can I just clarify, I'm not sure if I got this right, Kelly, but if a councillor was to ring Safe Call, that call would be accepted still at this point in time. So that is an option. But then it would be referred to the monitoring officer.
Yes.
That's fine. I think we just have to, as the other councillor said, I worry a bit about the 28 or whatever cases that are still outstanding, and can't sort of marry that up with the fact that the Standards Committee was recently adjourned for having no business on it. So I think the whole councillor thing is a thing that we need to look into. I'm not sure if it would come back to this committee or another one, but at the minute I'm sort of reassured by the fact that if anybody did want to ring the Safe Call, that option is still there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dunn. I think we are getting some sort of views of members that maybe it would be appropriate for a report to come to this committee on well, basically how councillors can make complaints, what the procedure is, so everybody knows how complaints are dealt with, and what who they're dealt with, what the procedures are, and because I think there seems to be some confusion, and you know, there are concerns that complaints by and against councillors don't seem to be being progressed. So could we have a report maybe at our next meeting? Is that?
Could I just respond to that, please, Chair? So thank you for those comments, Councillor Dunn. Perhaps it's something that, because I think some of this is very clearly outlined within the Constitution also. So either Member Services Working Group could perhaps consider that, and then in the first instance just be very clear that all members are very clearly the procedure. And it, I mean, I will commend many of the principles within the whistleblowing policy, also to Member Services Working Group, but one of the most useful things within that policy is a flow chart, which is on a very simple sheet, which makes it very clear how to make a complaint. So we can certainly ensure through Member Services Working Group that that procedure is very clearly articulated with the monitoring officers.
Thank you, Kelly. Just to clarify, obviously it's one thing how to make a complaint, but I think we need to know how they're progressed and what the procedure is and who is involved in progressing them. I think that's the information that councillors seem to be asking for. Was that going to be part of the?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Councillor Oliver.
Thank you, Chair. I should have. I think most of the issues I was going to raise and the questions I was going to ask have been addressed by Councillors Jackson and Murphy. But I'm just, I mean, first of all, I'd say that the staff response during the pandemic has been absolutely phenomenal. The flexibility, people suddenly working from home, the adaptability has been first class right across all services. I was going to pick up the point about agency staff that Councillor Murphy raised. I think it's really important that we lessen our reliance on agency staff and that we sort of work towards more permanent staff and fewer temporary staff. And I'd be interested to hear a bit more detail on that, either now or at another time, about the numbers of people and how that's progressing. I had a question for Kelly around sickness absence, and it's great that it's gone down during the pandemic. Is that something she expects to be sustained as we come out of COVID? And then I think the final point was one that's that a couple of councillors have raised around the sort of whistleblowing and governance and so on. The government wrote a report last summer on addressing cultural and governance failings in local authorities. And that report had a series of indicators of poor culture. And the first indicator was an over-reliance on interim statutory officers. And we have a situation here where I'm concerned that we're sort of in danger of falling into that trap. Another councillor described it last week as a revolving door of Section 151 officers, and I'd like to ask what plans are in place to actually address that issue, because 2 of our 3 statutory officers are effectively, you know, we've had 2 interim monitoring officers since September. We've had, I think, 5 finance directors since 2017. And it is something I think that needs to be addressed urgently. So that was the final question. Thank you.
Thank you. Kelly?
Thank you, Chair. I'll address those matters in turn. So in terms of agency staffing, we've been working really hard to ensure that agency staff are reduced and used to a minimum. I think there is a lot of useful information that we have as an organisation which is discussed, and managers are held to account through the Council's Workforce Committee. There are some areas where we have long-standing agency staff, and that is due to where we have recruitment difficulties, but the relevant executive directors and heads of service do have sight of those and are looking at alternatives. So I'm happy to supply further information to the committee, which is discussed at the Workforce Committee, if that is required. In terms of sickness absence, if I can just come on to that one. Sickness absence, we have seen significant reductions. Some of that has been down to flexibility that the council has afforded its staff, the technology that we have been able to use, but we are significantly concerned about rising COVID rates. We do have a high number of staff that have tested positive in the last week. We are also now starting to see cases of long COVID. So this, and some of these cases of long COVID are particularly debilitating for individuals. We are providing significant support to them through our occupational health service, but sadly some of these cases of long COVID are quite extreme, and these are individuals who have who work for the council and who have suffered for some months now. So I would suggest that I would hope some of our short-term sickness absence would continue to be reduced, but we may see an increased number of long-term sickness absence cases, which we manage extremely closely. But you know, we want to be a supportive employer, and we always aim to try and ensure that our staff can achieve the best that they can. But I am particularly saddened by some of these most recent cases, and I think it's something we need to keep a watching brief on. But we'll be managing it very closely through our executive team and through the Council's Workforce Committee. I think just in terms of some of the comments in relation to governance failures, I think it's of this is not unknown that this council has had some significant governance challenges within the last 12 months, and myself and other senior officers have raised these issues. I think there are many reasons why we have interim executive directors in place, particularly statutory officers. So we have 2 permanent statutory officers in terms of the monitoring officer and the head of paid service. The Section 151 officer role is filled by an interim. There are reasons as to why the previous post holders have left. The most recent post holder was successful in getting a post back in the NHS. I think to which he was, you know, was very sad to see him go, but we were very pleased for him from a career perspective. I think there is a rationale as to why others have left the organisation, and I think external audit and others are well aware of those. So I think we do have plans in place, and obviously there were some discussions at full council last week to ensure that we have a stable executive team, and that's one of the things that we're certainly looking at in conjunction with the leader.
Thank you very much. Councillor Jackson?
Yeah, just sort of an additional comment really on the whistleblowing policy. I see it says that the policy is currently being reviewed. So I think your request as chair is actually quite valid, given the concerns expressed in the committee. that a further report comes back to this committee.
Is that in relation to the whistleblowing of employees?
Yes. You said you were going to circulate the policy.
I've
Yeah.
sent the whistleblowing policy to Sean, and that's current. The whistleblowing policy for employees is currently under review.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, Councillor Dodd?
Yeah. Just going back to the elected members side of things, I think Kelly referred to the fact that the members' working group would probably be able to look into this. Can we make it an extra recommendation on here that that happens and that the report comes back?
Now, if I can just join in on that one, because that was kind of what I was trying to suggest, that actually they come back to this committee, because it's the Corporate Services Committee and we've got responsibility for all of those council policies.
Yeah, agreed.
That's fine. I'm just asking if we can make it an extra recommendation.
Okay, so that's been a proposal for extra recommendation by Councillor Dunn to bring the report, seconded by Councillor Jackson. All agreed? Yeah. Okay, so with that recommendation, are we happy to agree the rest of the report? And I think we'd also, as a committee, like to minute our thanks to all the staff who've done such a sterling job during the COVID, and you know, it's a testament to all their hard work that we are in the relatively healthy position that we are. So thank you. Right. Next is item 8. Now I think this is one with Councillor Oliver's declared interest, so we'll give you a shout when we're done. You're going to be lurking outside. Okay. This one is the debt recovery report. I think Graham's going to lead on this one. So if you'd like to talk us through it. Thanks.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Morning, everyone. Graham Barnes, Revenues and Benefits Manager. This report is a twice-yearly report that we provide to the committee. This particular report is a year-end report for the 2021 financial year, and it advises the committee on the level of outstanding debt that is due to the council. Obviously, the management of income is a key priority for the council because it continues to fund service delivery. We have a number of policies in the corporate debt recovery policy, a lot of annexes within there, which set out the ways we deal with the billing, collection and recovery of those debts. Now, I'm aware that there's a lot of information in this report, lots of figures, etc., particularly that are used for comparison purposes. I don't intend to go through each individual line by line, as we could be here for some time. So I just want to try and give more of an overall position. The first thing I want to talk about is write-offs. The write-offs in 2021 get reported to Cabinet, and they're actually going there tomorrow. Those are where debts are deemed irrecoverable and we're unable to collect. The figure for the 2021 financial year, 793,504.15, is considerably lower than previous years. It's normally, historically, it's been sort of over 2 million. A number of reasons for that, really, but the predominant one is the fact that, obviously, during COVID in the 2021 financial year, the resources have been diverted, and particularly in my service area, we've been dealing with business grants and test and trace payments, and also there was a limit on the recovery action that we could take as a result of, well, COVID anyway, but the Magistrates Court closed for a considerable period, and also enforcement agents that we use for business rates and council tax were also restricted during the 2021 financial year. So, like I say, there was a number of reasons. Often when we're taking recovery action, it does flush out some of these accounts where we discover that those debts are irrecoverable due to a number of reasons. So the first debt stream that I want to focus on is sundry debt. We had 15.878 million outstanding at the 31st of March 2021. 14,902,000 was past the due terms. It's lower overall in comparison to 2019-20, but it's higher for the past due terms. However, that's predominantly, again, due to the effects of COVID and the fact that less recovery action was taken. but obviously since March, some of that money has continued to be collected, and we had 5.8 million collected by finance since April, so that amount has obviously reduced quite substantially. For council tax, we've got 156,691 properties in Northumberland, and it's an ever-increasing sort of base. 211,214,000 is the debit, and we collected 97% of that. It's the lowest since 2010-11. However, it was the highest when we've done some benchmarking with the 12 northeastern authorities. So although it was low, we've sort of done quite well in comparison to our neighbours. A lot of that was, or some of it was offset by the COVID-19 hardship payment that the government announced, which basically meant that those council taxpayers on council tax support, to which we've got 20,000, benefited from a payment of up to £150 off their liability. So for some, what that meant was they got their council tax paid for 2021 out of the COVID payment. Like I touched on earlier, there was very little recovery action taken just because of the constraints that we had around the Magistrates' Court and the fact that the bailiffs couldn't, or enforcement agents as they're now called, couldn't take any action. That's sort of highlighted in paragraph 17 of the report, which lists the recovery documents that we issue on an annual basis with comparison to previous years. And as you can see, the levels that we issued are a lot lower. Council tax arrears are the highest we've ever had as a year end, but once again that's just a sort of affected by the lack of recovery action that we could take. National non-domestic rates, or business rates as we tend to call them, we've got 13,619 properties, 48.845 million is the debit. We collected 93.3% of that debit, which is certainly below average, and below average when we've compared against our northeast neighbours as well. No recovery action was taken during 2021 for the reasons that I've already sort of mentioned, but also there was a big drive during 2021 with the government support under the business grants regime, to which we've paid out probably close to 200 million right across the piece. So obviously businesses were struggling, wasn't appropriate to take recovery action, so that is the main reason for that. If we move on to housing benefit overpayments, these are payments of housing benefit where there's been no entitlement. 1.616 recovered in 2021 against 2.3 in 2019-20. Once again, there was no real proactive recovery action taken. These are often claimants who are still continuing to be on benefit, and quite a number of these are now moving to universal credit, where they have a break in their entitlement, and that means that it's more difficult to collect, because one of the methods we would use is to get payments back via ongoing entitlement. But if you look at our ratio of outstanding housing benefit per caseload, we're second in the North East region. So I think overall we're doing quite well for that. Next item is housing rent. Rent debit was 31.7 million for 2021, and that target was exceeded. There's no benchmarking information available. However, the housing team are joining Housemark, which is a national benchmarking framework, and data for 2021 isn't yet available, but should be available later in the year. So that'll enable some comparison with other national authorities who partake in the Housemark collection scheme. Paragraph 46 refers to evictions. In Northumberland, obviously, they're always a last resort, but in some cases they're inevitable. However, there was no evictions in 2021, obviously COVID being a reason once again. We've currently got 2,266 tenants who are in receipt of universal credit, and that is up from 1,658 in 2019-20. Whilst the position in the report was a snapshot as at the 31st of March 2021, obviously debt does continue to be collected. For council tax and business rates, courts are currently set up for June, July and August. Although they are still virtual at this moment in time, it does enable the council where people are not paying to progress through the recovery process, and then once we obtain a liability order from Magistrates Court, we're able to utilise some additional recovery power to try and recover that money. We currently hold quarterly meetings with Citizens Advice Northumberland and have done for quite some time. Citizens Advice were always quite keen to have dialogue with the council, in particular around enforcement agents and or bailiffs, as they were formerly called. We have really good relationships with CAB, and we're able to make referrals and things like that where we identify cases where people are potentially struggling. So there's a lot of safeguards in there. One thing just to flag up with the committee is that Northumberland is currently working with the other Tyne and Wear authorities, with the Cabinet Office, on a data sharing sort of protocol whereby the councils involved would get access to HMRC data. It's particularly to do with collection of council tax, and the sharing of HMRC data would enable the council to increase attachment of earning orders, because we get information about where people work, whereas at this current moment in time we only have that information if they tell us, and not everybody obviously does. So that could be an interesting development going further forward, which could assist with council tax collection. The recommendation on the report, Chair, is that members are requested to note the contents. Like I said earlier, I'm aware of the level of detail in there, but obviously I'll try and answer any questions that anybody may have.
Thank you, Graham. It's a very good detailed report. Just for members of the information, Councillor Dunn and Eagle Eyes did spot a typo on page 73,
yes. Sorry,
paragraph 52, and there's reference to those on universal credit, and it should say, therefore, those on universal credit are performing worse than those that aren't, rather better.
Yes.
But I think it's quite clear from the context, but just as a typo. So, any questions or queries regarding that report? No? Are we happy to note that? And sorry. Councillor Murphy. Councillor Murphy first.
Yes, so what I'm curious about, and again, thank you for all this very detailed information. A lot of numbers there to be digested. Yeah. When you're talking about irrecoverable debt, in terms of scrutiny, I would find it really helpful to know what criteria is being applied in making that decision. And also, I would really like to know who has the authority to make a decision that one debt is recoverable and therefore should be pursued, another debt is irrecoverable and isn't pursued. Is that a named individual? Does that go to Cabinet? So I would find it helpful to know that. And also, when you've used terms within the report about, debt being so old, I would find it really helpful to have specifics on the age of debts and why it's considered that it's too old. But my last point is, when you do the briefer report about write-offs, why is the magic figure of £10,000 used as the kind of benchmark for reporting it to us? The numbers, is this a nationally recognised benchmark figure? Could it be 5,000? Could it be 20,000? I'd just be curious as to why 10,000 is used. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Graham, could you just give us a quick response?
A couple of things there. The council has a write-off policy, which is in the corporate debt recovery policy, but I'd be happy to provide those details.
Could we have that circulated for the members of the committee, just so the new members can have a look at it? Thanks. I said, could we have that policy circulated for members of this committee, just so that they have an idea what they're comparing it to?
That's fine. Yeah, obviously write-offs do get reported annually to Cabinet, and the arrangements are contained within the Council's finance and contract rules. And I think you raised the figure there of £10,000. That is one which is just contained within the finance and contract rules. So we obviously report against it in line with that requirement.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Dunn.
Thank you. Graham, you mentioned before that council tax arrears are at the highest ever level. And obviously the coronavirus pandemic has pushed many people into financially precarious positions. Yeah. And I think we can expect to see an increasing number of people needing help with council tax bills over the next few months and longer into the future. Yeah. What impact will this have on the council itself? I'm assuming that as people move on to universal credit, then we'll lose that ability to reclaim that. Is that right? So the first question is, what impact will this have on the council? And the second, how is the council making sure that people entitled to help actually get it?
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Councillor Dunn. Well, the second question first, how are people, how are the council aware that we help people who are obviously struggling? Well, obviously for those on a low income, there's a council tax support scheme, which obviously reduces people's council tax liability depending on circumstances. That policy or that scheme can support up to 92% of council tax liability. So those on the lowest incomes and welfare benefits, things like that, will only have to pay 8%. But like I said, as part of the presentation for 2021, the government introduced this £150 hardship payment, which removed last year's charge for quite a lot of people, because the 8% was less than the £150, if that makes sort of sense. So they had their liability removed for that period for that financial year, and that's also a scheme which has come forward into 2021-22, the current financial year. So there's that same cohort won't have any council tax to pay in this current financial year neither. But obviously we're always sensitive towards people who've got council tax arrears, a bit like what you've said. It's sort of the potentially built up through no fault of their own, people getting furloughed, you know, that sort of thing, people being made redundant. So obviously there's quite a lot of mechanisms that we have in place to make elongated sort of payment arrangements, referrals to citizens' advice, etc., to try and assist. But obviously we've just got to be aware that we've got to try and collect as well. But obviously if you're a bit too overzealous in the current climate, you'll suddenly find you'll get criticised. So it's a bit of a balancing act, but the staff are sort of well versed, well trained in those things, and they know where to refer when they recognise some difficult cases or those that are really struggling.
Thank you very much, Graham. Right. Oh, sorry, Councillor Wallace.
Sorry, Chair. Sorry, my apologies. I put my hand up late. There's a lot of information there. And can I say on a personal level, I would like to thank Graham, because he's helped me in my new role as a councillor recently with something I couldn't understand. And the reply I got back was first class. There's so much information here. I can't believe I'm asking for some more information. It's on page 80, on 18, it says, for example, number of write-offs over £10,000, 3. And it's like Councillor Dunn says, if it had been 9,900, would it have been brought to our attention, or is it just forgotten about? And in 17, obviously the number of write-offs over 10,003, I'm guessing, I hope you appreciate, Chair, with being new, and those members that's been here a lot longer than me, I apologise for asking this. But is that 3 businesses that's in 17, or is that just one business in 17?
Okay.
Are they connected?
Right. Okay, Graham, have you got an answer
it's
for that?
three separate businesses.
So that's 3 separate businesses. How do we go about, Chair, finding, has it been pursued for 12 months, 12 years? I mean, this is basically, I think, what Councillor Murphy was asking, and that's the sort of information I think as new councillors we need to know.
Well, I think, yes, I think Councillor Wallace, I think Councillor Murphy did make that point as well. I think for what I've asked Graham to circulate the write-offs policy, which will show you the criteria for writing things off, and that will probably give you a bit of an idea of how that decision is made and the criteria. And if there are any issues that councillors do get when they read it and they want to bring it as an item, we can bring it as an item. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Councillor Robinson?
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question, Graham. When we start getting heavy, when people miss their paying their bills, the council tax bills and that, do we include all these avenues of help in with, you know, the reminders or
Yes.
even the demand letters or anything like that?
Yes, we do.
Good.
We do.
Thank you.
Yeah, and obviously, you know, if people contact us directly, then we're able to have one-to-one conversations with them, etc. But there is information that goes out on the reminder notices to tell them where to
Okay,
turn.
thank you very much. So I think are we happy? Oh, sorry, Councillor Dunn?
Yeah. I'm going to go back to page 80, paragraph 17, the 3 separate businesses. Can I ask, did these relate to a member?
Councillor Graham? Sorry, Councillor Graham?
No, I think is the answer.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, that's that item. I think we're going to bring Councillor Oliver back in. Oh, just for information, obviously the write-offs report, which is the short report at the end, that's just for information only, but we have actually touched on that one in our discussions. Okay, the next item on the agenda is item 9, which is the work programme. Graham? Sorry, Sean, sorry.
Councillor Sean. Yep, the work programme is circulated to members as part of the pack. The issues that we've added are just sort of a rollover from the issues that were raised by the last committee, so we've just rolled them over to the work programme this time. But obviously, appreciate you're a new committee, some new members. If there are any items that you want to us to add to the work programme, we will do. And of course, I've noted the earlier request regarding to complaints regarding members.
Yeah, and just to reiterate that, if any members of the committee would like an item to go on the work programme, then let Sean and I know, and we can see if we can put it on the programme. Thanks.
Just also to make the point about the debt recovery update, that's a report that comes to this committee twice a year. So if there are any issues that members want to raise following the circulation of the policy, if you can let yourself and the chair know, and if Graham needs to enhance the next report to reflect that, we'll get in touch with Graham to do that.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, so next is urgent business, and for once we do have some, which is quite exciting. You may recall that Councillor Hunter did request at full council that the changes, the East Coast Main Line, proposed changes, the East Coast Main Line timetable come to scrutiny. There was actually a statutory consultation, and this is the only committee meeting at which we can bring this here before that window ends, hence it's been taken as urgent business today. So you have been circulated by email as a quick briefing note on the situation. It's quite self-explanatory, but if you could just talk us through it back there. Thanks.
Yes, thank you, Chair. It is a very short briefing note. The region's been lobbying for many years for increased capacity and improvements on the East Coast Main Line from Edinburgh down to London. As part of this response, the 4 operators on the East Coast Main Line, that's LNER, TransPennine Express, Northern Rail and Cross Country, have launched 4 separate consultations packaged together, which hasn't made it easy to unpick. Consultation on a new timetable to be introduced from May 2020. The impact of these proposed changes on the county is significant, and it's described in the report. The 2 main impacts are we will lose 24 services per day stopping in the county, with Morpeth taking the major hit and Berwick the balance. Hidden in that is a loss of connectivity to the northwest, to Manchester and Liverpool, because the TransPennine Express hourly service that goes through the county from Manchester and Liverpool to Edinburgh will in future stop at Newcastle. And that's further compounded by the Manchester Airport service that stops at Newcastle, which people from the county do access. That's not going to exist at all in future. It's not just in the county that there's problems. Elsewhere in the region, there's also going to be some adverse impacts. Darlington, for instance, will lose 29 services a day. So that's got a massive impact on Tees Valley, and Durham itself will lose 8 services a day. It's hard to see what the actual benefits of the changes are, but what they amount to are there'll be 1 extra train an hour into Newcastle from London. The journey time from London to Newcastle will be 5 minutes quicker. The journey time from Newcastle to Edinburgh will be 5 minutes quicker. The report describes the proposed way forward, which has been promoted by Transport North East, the Regional Transport Authority, and which we support, is that we call on government to suspend the timetable changes, to establish a task force to look at the capacity issues on the East Coast Main Line and how these can be addressed in a way that doesn't have such a detrimental impact on services. So far, as a council, the leader has written to the Secretary of State for Transport, strongly objecting to the changes. The leader's also asked our 4 MPs in a letter to object to the changes. As a council, we will be making a formal response to the consultation, and we will also be responding via Transport North East to the consultation. I'll take any questions that members have on the report, Chair. There is no recommendation per se, it is an information item, but if the committee were minded to add their weight to those objections, I think that would be valuable.
Thank you. Just one quick question. Obviously, you said letters have been sent to the 4 MPs. Have we had any responses from them that we're aware of?
They were sent from the leader, so I don't know if the leader has had responses yet, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, well, these are quite brutal cuts by the look of them. Do members have any? Councillor Jackson?
Yeah, obviously it seems to be very detrimental to quite a number of communities in Northumberland for, like you say, for very little benefit. We've been working for decades to actually increase the number of local services and accessible services in Northumberland, and it's actually been quite a success. Morpeth and Berwick in particular, and Cramlington actually, have gained extra services as the years have gone by. And now here at a stroke, we're going to have a substantial cut in the number of services. And just when we're trying to improve connectivity in Northumberland, it's been cut at a stroke. I think the question is, I suppose, is which body is proposing this cut, and that being the case, we as a scrutiny committee have got a perfect right to ask for representatives of that body to come and answer questions at this committee, and I think we should include that in our package of requests that we're doing, and fully support every action possible to try and minimise the damage of these proposals.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Jackson. That does sound. Could we do that? Could we invite them Yeah, well, whether they can come or not, that's a question. Just on that point, members, are we happy to say in our response that we would like an invitation to the organisation to send representatives to a meeting where we can ask questions about these proposed changes? Yeah, okay, agreed. If we can do that. Councillor Robinson, you're next.
Thank you, Chair. I think this is the absolute opposite of what we need. Councillor Jackson made a few of the points I was going to make, but, you know, we heard section 1 of this meeting. We're regenerating communities, trying to regenerate the towns up and down this county, and we need the connectivity to enable that to happen. One of the points I make about the train station in Bedlington is, not only does it make it easy for people to get out from Bedlington, Newcastle, say, it brings people in. If we have the right sort of infrastructure in place, of course, but it brings people into an area. That's what we're trying to achieve throughout the county, and this is the antithesis of what we need for a transport plan.
I think might be wrong, but I think all the members would echo the sentiments. I think we should. So we agree that we strongly support the leader in his efforts to oppose this, and would request that the council's formal response also opposes these objections, and that we'd like to invite a member of representative of the body who's actually doing the consultation to come here and explain the wisdom of it to us.
Thank you, Chair.
Yep, okay, thank you. Right, I'll move on now to part 2 of the agenda, which is the exclusion of the press and public for confidential items, as set out in 11. I'll not read it all out. So can we cut the live stream?